Oh, vinegar.
Okay. Welcome to the Free People Are Here to week 5. Almost halfway done. I'm sure at this stage you already kind of see what EJBs are about and how they work, and after you've played around with it a bit. So the quiz went much better this weekend from last week, so it's about a 20% climb in the average. Don't know if it's because we're less people, just the bright people left. So looking at the bottom 3, so it's not really the bottom 3, it's more question 10 than at 50%. And the rest were high, but we do the bottom 3. So looking at question 10, I'm sharing my screen, right? Yeah. And this one is no real trick here. It's just something that you need to know, and that is that at runtime, and it's just part of the EJB spec, is you can't go and rebind or change the value of an environment variable. So that's a deployment time thing that you change. So you change in your deployment of script, and then that's it. You can't go and change it from code again. So what will happen is it will allow it to compile and it'll run, but it'll throw a naming operation not supported exception. So that's just something you just need to know. It's no trick about that. Then the next one was question 8. All right, so question 8 was looking at giving you a GIND address, and then you need to match it with the actual packaging. Now, this is sort of a packaging question as well, so it's sort of a combination. So the trick here was understanding the packaging that we've done before as well, and looking at the GIND address. So it's global, so it can be anywhere in the year, and then auto processing is your module that needs to be in, or your app that it's in. So all of these ones that sort of say any name jar is already out, they're not valid. It needs to be one of the auto processing jar ones. And then you just needed to understand, so that's where the GIND bit comes in, and the other bit you just need to understand what's the deployment, how you deploy a year, and for that it's your actual classes don't go into your metadata. It goes into your root, and that's also where it's not like a var structure comes about, because var will actually go under the classes bit there. So it'll be the auto processing one here where it's auto processing jar, and the package is straight in the root. So that'll be the correct answer. Like I said, it's 70% average on this, so most people had this right. And you can expect a few of these types of questions around deployments. They're not just around GIND, but around deployments, understanding the structures and where files are. So they might have that EJB jar like somewhere in a different folder there or something like that. So it's just looking out for that and understanding the structures. Then the last 2 is 1 and 8. So 1 is it's not an infoware question, it's a Rory question. R1. So it's looking at a session facade or a bean be allowed to access a JPA entity manager directly, and that is false. That's why we're using the GIND stuff, and that's why what the whole session was about is you shouldn't be doing that. That's why 80%, and then what's the other one? 10. 7. All right, so this one was looking around using a EJB container, a local container, not like a server like Glassfish or JBoss or something, and how you get your GIND or how you do your EJB, how you get context, and how you get something out of the context. So the fact that they're talking about EJB container is already tell you that the ones which don't have an EJB container in the code is already out. So the first 2 don't count. They're not using an EJB container. And then the other bit, if you remember how EJB containers work, you know that you have to create it first, so the bottom one is out already as well. So from a GIND point of view, you don't even have to worry about what they're showing up. And this is also one of the things that they do in the exam, is they sort of, hey, look at my left hand, look at my left hand, and then they're doing something with their right hand. You know, so they're kind of actually testing you more about your EJB container knowledge here than actual GIND knowledge. So it's just things like that to also look out for, is although this will take you a while to go and read and understand, okay, well, what would the GIND address look like? Is it global? You know, they might throw in I might throw in a module one year or a Java comp /env and try and trick you up that way. But the thing that they're doing here, and what the trick is just looking at the EJB container and figuring that out. So this was the only, I'd say, tricky question from the ones that were at the bottom, but I think is tricky. I'd say that. All right, and those were the questions. So this coming week, I think, this coming week will be 10 questions again. One thing about this coming week is there might be a question about singletons in, so you might want to start reading that. Getting a little bit tricksy there. All right, so let's get into this week's topic. Are there any questions about the quiz? Anybody? No questions? Everybody happy?
How is the chat on?
It should be on. Nobody. But I think it flashes when it comes on. All right, so this week's topic is advanced session beans. And we'll be looking at the stateful and stateless session beans life cycles and async methods. They've got the bits around fine-grained control over packaging deployment, but I'm not going to look at that again. I don't actually know what they mean by that. You can package deploy it. I think it might have some things to do around the deployment descriptors again. And then understanding the relationship between the EJB container and EJB component. Hopefully at this stage you understand this. I'm not going to go through that again. The EJB container contains the components, and the EJB container is responsible for certain things, and the EJB component has the business logic in. So today's session is going to focus on the lifecycle and the async bits around it. So looking at a little map, we're still busy with session beans, and sort of the first part of all these exam topics is around session beans and message beans and singleton beans before we get to container services. So we're still busy with the session beans there. All right, so getting into the session bean life cycles, and the reason the container exposes that is so you can have some control around things that happen when the bean starts up, when it gets destroyed, or when it gets passivated. And that can help things so like initializing things, like if you've got some of the lookup that's in a stateless bean or a stateful bean, initializing that or breaking it down when the bean gets destroyed. So for the exam, you need to know these life cycles. You need to know which order they happen in. You need to know what you're allowed to do in these specific callbacks. So most of the post-construct ones, like on a status bean, you can't really go and inject another bean in during that. So there's a bunch of rules in here. Just go and read and study the study notes. You'll see what those are. Now the way that the lifecycle methods work is via callbacks. So you go and annotate a bean, or you can use a deployment descriptor and say when something gets constructed or gets destroyed, I want this to happen. And from EJB3, any method on a bean can be a lifecycle callback method. It doesn't have to be a specific interface or a specific abstract method that you have to override or anything like that. And one important thing is also that for the initialization, don't use a constructor. So pretty much don't do anything in the constructor or expect to use anything to constructor. Rather use whatever method you've marked as your post-construct callback. That's what you want to use. So the constructor you don't even put a constructor in really. It doesn't really matter much. So the first one we're going to look at is the stateless session bean, and stateless session bean is pretty simple. It's only got two life states, so it either doesn't exist or it's in the method ready pool. So from the second week, you remember that stateless beans are shared between the different clients, and the container is responsible for starting them up, breaking them down, deciding how many there are. So although if you do an equality test, a stateless session bean will do stateless session beans with the same interface, will tell you it's the same bean, it might not necessarily be. So the way that a stateless session bean comes to life is if it doesn't exist and a client wants to start a session with it, the container will then go a new one up, create a new instance of it, inject any resources it needs. So from last week's session, the resources we've got there, so your entity managers or session context, wherever is there, inject those into it, and then call your post construct. So that's why you should only do things in the post construct, because if you're expecting to have a database connection, you're not going to have it in your construct yet. You're only going to have it in your post construct. Once that's up and running, it puts it in the method ready pool, and then you can call a business method on it. So the only time that thing will go out of the method pool if it's not required anymore, and that's up to the container provider deciding how often they want to clean up the cache, and or how many beans they want to keep in there. And that's going back to week 2, where you define the minimum and the maximum amount of stateless beans you want your container to maintain. So if it goes over, or if the container decides, well, we can scale back again, then the pre-destroy will be called on those beans. And that's sort of the simpleness of the session bean, a stateless bean life cycle. So let's see if there's anything I left out. So sort of the post construct. So you've got 2 events there. It's going back to your pre-destroy and your post construct. Those are the only 2 events you've got on the stateless bean, and you can either do it via notation, and we'll see in the demo now how to do that, or you can do it via the deployment construct. You're also going to define it there. One thing to remember as well is, and they do ask this in the exam, is the security context and transaction context. So in any of these callback methods, the security context is unspecified, but you will have a security context. From a status bean, so you can't really go and check that. On the stateful bean, you can go and use that because it's part of it. And then you'll have limited access to your session bean, your gender, your lookups, and your entity manager factory. So there's just things to keep in mind. They don't really go into too much detail about this in exam. You just need to know about it. I can't remember if actually they might have code bits there, but I can't remember now. And then for session beans, you won't have any access to other beans, to resource managers, to entity managers, timer services, or timer methods. And there's also one of those things which sort of just kind of makes logical sense. When you start up the bean, there's different instances. You don't the fact that bean is for a specific session, a specific client is calling that status bean. You can't go and do things which will have more to do with kind of statey type things. And looking at the stateful bean, so stateful bean has got a bit more happening. So a stateful bean has 3 different states. Either doesn't exist, it's ready, so there's no pool in there, or it's passivated. So the session bean also starts at the same as a stateless bean. So when a client starts a session with a stateful bean, the container creates a new instance, does the injections for any resources that are required, and then does a post construct callback. The client can then go into call business methods. Once the client has stopped calling business methods, and this depends on your container settings, and some containers use caching and actual pooling for stateless beans, or for stateful beans, although it has nothing to do with the specification. Some containers do that. And usually the way that the passivation works is there's a limit to the amount of stateful beans that the container will hold, and how long and how often it checks it for any stale beans. So if a container can hold 1,000 stateful beans, and it'll check every minute which ones are sort of not being called or stale. It'll go and clean those up and say, okay, well, I've got 1,200 beans now, so we can start cleaning up, and then that'll passivate. So what happens when it passivates, it actually serializes that bean, the state of the bean. So any instance variables, any resource, everything gets serialized and then gets backed away somewhere.
You don't have to implement serialization. It's serializable though on the bean. Though.
No, you don't have to implement serializable on the bean. But the resources you've got on the bean have to be, well, they have to be serializable if you want to get them back. So if you've got any fields or any data on that bean which can't be serializable, then you've got 2 options there. Either mark them as transient, so they won't be serialized, or on the pre-passivate step, you go and you null them up, so the container doesn't try and serialize them. And then, of course, when the client wants to call a method on that bean again, it's been passivated, it'll be reactivated. So the container will actually create a new instance of it, but it'll have the same state as the one before. That whole session, everything that got serialized when it got passivated will be put back in there, and it'll be like the bean is still there. And those are the different states. So once again, you've got your post-construct and post-construct and pre-destroy methods, like with the stateless bean, and you've got X-rays or pre-passivate and your post-activate. And in the exam, there's a lot of questions when it comes to life cycles around passivation and activation, around serialization, and knowing what can be serialized and what can't be serialized, how you would handle it. And I said sort of there's really only two options: either mark it as transient, and then you do something to get the state back, or you mark it as null. And if you want to keep track of the state, you can't go and save it to a file. So you can't, because, like I said, it's one of the rules is you don't have access to the file system, so you can't directly go and create a file and save the data in there. You'll have to do it for some other resource manager. So you can either go and save that state in like a database or some other caching mechanism that you've injected into your bean.
This is just an opportunity for them to like test the shit out of something. Which,
Yeah.
I don't know. We try to work out if anyone's ever used this.
Stateful bean.
Yeah, stateful beans with the session the life cycles. I can't actually remember. Joe, has anyone actually used? Are you aware of anyone using session beans, life cycles, stateful session bean life cycles?
Hey, Albert, can you guys hear me?
Hold
Hello?
on, you're very. Say again.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we haven't really used that. I haven't really found some place to use that. Like, normally we will use it like for the shopping cart, but we've never written it like that.
I suppose we're not shopping cart writing people.
Nope.
But I think the way it also becomes very useful is if you start using your beans outside of a container, like from a Pojo client, and you want to have that kind of state, which is actually a server-side state or session kept, then what might be useful. But we haven't really used it like that.
Okay.
Yeah, not like if you're doing like makes it for like web services or REST services, using your beans for that, you might.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, let's get the volume down. Yeah. Okay. The other thing that it's different between the stateful and the stateless bean is that the stateful bean, the container doesn't necessarily automatically go and destroy it except for the timeout. So there's a timeout event as well. So if a bean has been stale for, and that's usually long, I think the default setting on Tommy is like an hour before it completely destroys a bean by itself. So for a stateful bean, you have to go and call the remove method. Whichever callback method is marked as remove, you have to go and call that from the client. Otherwise, the stateful beans stay in memory and they just use up the resources. So even though they get passivated, it's resource intensive. So that's one of the other important things. Around remove, you've also got a retain if exception option. So while it's doing the remove callback, if it's an exception, it actually will keep the bean. I think the default is true there. Can't remember. I think it's true. All right. Is there anything?
Damn no.
Okay. So so I've got two demos on the life cycle. So the one is just to show using the methods and setting up the callbacks. The other one is showing the pre-passivate and post-activate things. Well, it's not no fireworks in that demo. It is there. So let me just do this.
Slideshow mode.
Presentation mode.
Oh, yeah.
Boom.
So cool.
Okay. So this is a simple little WAR Maven project again. So I've got a stateful bean here that has got the different methods. So I've got a post construct, a pre-destroy, a remove. I've got the pre-passivate. So let's say sort of any method you want to use as a callback, you just go and mark it as a post construct. Now you can have multiples of these in your bean if you want to, although you'll see IntelliJ doesn't like it, and you shouldn't do it that way. The containers, I'm not sure how Tommy kind of does it, and it actually calls multiples of them, but I'm not sure what other containers are going to do. But you should generally just have one method in there, marked as a post construct or pre-destroy.
How does it know which order to use, though?
It seems to do it the XML deployment descriptor first, and then whatever you've marked as a method. So in your post construct, when you pre-destroy, you can do whatever you want. Not whatever you want, but what's allowed. So there's certain things you can and can't do. So that's what you need to know for the exam. So all I'm doing is whenever these methods gets called, I'm just sort of printing out a little message to the console. Then on the stateless bean, it's the same type of thing as well. And here we've just got the post construct and pre-destroy. And then I'm also just going to show how to do it with the deployment constructor to call some other methods there. And then we've just got to servers that just go and call these things. Looking at the stateful bean first. So we inject the bean, like always, using AGB annotation. Is then going to go and call the business method on there, call the remove, and then just print it out. So just go and package this up. Using Maven again, I just do Maven package. Just builds and puts it in the WAR file. And then using Tommy, Maven Tommy for the plugin, and then run. And just deploy it. Okay. I think I should have the.
I think you wanted the embedded container now.
Yeah, I tried it and I couldn't get the properties to work. For the section, the stateful bean there. If you go back to.
I think you're in the wrong window. Are you?
No, I'm not. I don't know. It's doing something on the terminal. Not sure what.
Garbage connected to yourself. Self-collected.
What are you doing, terminal?
Add a screenshot.
I'm going to go view.
Got married in the morning.
Okay, I don't know. It's sort of got two terminals happening there. All right, so we can see sort of looking at the events that happens there. First, the constructor got called, expected, then the post construct, then only our business method, and then we called the remove method there. And that cleaned it up. And then we can see after we called remove, then the pre-destroy got called. For the pre-destroy, I've just got a lot of stars in there because the terminal on IntelliJ, I don't know, when I close it, it sometimes doesn't show. It sort of overrides the console outputs. All right, so one thing I just want to do, so after we call remove, we do try and then go and call the bean again. I'm just going to add that in. For an exception, because bean's been removed, has been destroyed, and you can't get that instance again. So big questions like this as well. So let me just go back here, exit, packages again, and start it up. Alright, so if I refresh this, you can see it doesn't get to the done message there. And if we go back here, you can see that get an exception there. That's sort of all overwritten, but you can see like it's trying to get that bean and it can't find it. So that little bit at the bottom here.
She's gone.
You see, so it actually doesn't see it there, it tries to activate it, it's not there, and it just crashes. And the thing that also happens is if you, like for status list, you'll see that if I don't go and call the remove method here,
make it a little bit bigger. The little dwarf eyes are same thing.
where I am now.
Oh.
If we leave it now, and even if I close the container, it's not going to call the pre-destroy on this, because that's not part of the. If I call that, I don't know why it does this. It's like it's got another terminal running there. That
well, it itself might be running itself.
I don't actually know what happened, you know. Like on different terminal windows, yeah.
I'm not sending you this IntelliJ. Okay?
I know.
I want the
IntelliJ is letting me down
there
a big time.
You'll have license. Anyone asks. Licenses from it's not me.
What's happening? Just kill it. By anyone? I'm still running now. Let's see, stop. Okay. All right. Let's just see. Okay. I don't know what happened. Hopefully it stopped itself now. But when the pre-destroy doesn't get called, we just close the container. If you're looking at the stateless bean, stateless servlet. So it's sort of doing the same thing. And a stateless bean. It's from that. And being solved in the Stormy idea anymore.
What do you expect?
This is the stateless one, yeah. Full state. This. You can see it calls constructor, post-constructor, and only the business method, the same as before. Unlike the stateful, we don't have a remove method here, so the container is responsible for that bit. So what happens is if I actually go and exit, you'll see it actually calls a pre-destroy there for you. And that's what happens with the stateful bin. So that's why I put the stars in there, because you can see sort of, I don't know, Tommy or the terminal overwrites the things on the console there. So the other bit you can also do is go back to, I think I shouldn't run it from here though, something like that. If I go into the EJB deployment container, what I can go and do is I can actually go in for the session bean, go and set up the deployment descriptors from here. For that, so you've got your post construct event and you've got your lifecycle callback that you can put in there. And it's important other initialize. Put that in. I'm just going to do one for the pre-destroy as well.
Don't have to put is that the full domain name?
No, it's probably because it's part of the. Oh, it's just the EJB name, and because I don't do anything else, it's the name of the class. Set those up. Out of full screen mode. It's like it's jumping between the instances. And that's what's happening there. Alright, so you can set it up with your deployment descriptors there. And what will actually happen is if I... And you'll see it actually call both.
You could switch on like logging with this. You go to the descriptor, you got your class, you change your descriptor, and you could switch on like a post-activate or pre-passivate to log. I can't think of a reason to do this.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, I don't know, you might have different passivate and pre-destroy methods, and you might want to do the same thing on one of them.
To a database or to a log file.
Yeah. Okay, so if I refresh that and I go back to, yeah, you can see it actually, it still calls a constructor, but now it's calling the other post construct as well and the normal post construct.
I don't know why they're allowing that.
Yeah, I don't think it's supposed to allow it. I couldn't find anything in the spec that says you're not. And the one book actually says...
The web spheres and the web logics don't allow that.
Yeah, you can try it on, well, you guys can try it on Glassfish and see if it allows it.
Or WebSphere Developer Edition, which is totally free. If you don't have a production license.
You can actually see if you go to the stateless bean EJB complaint, the IntelliJ actually tells you that there's a rear post construct. So it's clever enough to pick it up, although it allows it. So that we can go and add your things for your deployment descriptor. I can't remember if there were any questions about the deployment descriptor in the exam, but be aware that you can do them. Like Roy also said, can't really think of a use case for changing it afterwards. I guess if you are going, if you're doing, I guess if you're doing completely deployment descriptor and not using annotations at all, then you'll probably do it that way. Then you'll do your post construct, you'll define it.
Tom Cruise dropping down from a building, you know, trying to actually hack the system. Yeah. He's got his deployment descriptor in his hand, and he wants to actually, you know, hack the system. That's what I say.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, I can understand. Think if you're going full on deployment descriptor, now for no annotations, then you'll probably do it like that. All right. And you'll see it'll go and call both construct. We got both pre-destroy methods there. All right, then the other bit around the passivation, although it doesn't really show much, is as part of the Tommy examples is a simple stateful callbacks example. And what that does is the same idea. You've got your pre-passivate, your post-activate, and your different callback methods there. And then it just as some observers here that observe those methods, and it actually just notifies them that the following happens, and then that goes and counts things up. And then on the test, it goes and calls these different things and just go and sees what the count is.
You put this in the forum, though, the Tommy examples.
Yeah.
They're not part of the other examples.
Yeah, I think it's, what's it called? It's like OpenEJB examples. There's a zip file for it, and then there's a bunch of them in there. And all of these are Tommy, because there's Tommy examples. So you can run via Tommy. I think these ones also have ant scripts as well. Yeah, they've got ant scripts as well that you can use.
Who uses ant?
Ant-Man uses ant.
Yeah, I've seen the ant scripts. I've seen the SARS, the essential ant scripts were thousands of lines long. Thousands. So
yeah, but it's different things, right?
And eventually we're all going to move over to Gradle.
Hello?
Sorry, Joe?
Yeah, I said they're brilliant things. I don't just put them down. Thank you. I'll write those.
No, I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying we need to move over to Maven.
At the time, it did what it's supposed to do.
Oh, yeah, I know. You don't have to get defensive. I know. I'm fully aware of them. I just try to convert them into Maven, and I didn't really get far.
Yeah, that we realized.
All right, so on the stateful, on this one, what it does, it runs this little test, and you can just sort of see it going, calling the different steps. So post-construct, count, post-construct, then pre-passivate, pre-destroy, all the different bits there. And the way that they got this demo to run is when they set up the actual embedded container there, they've given it some properties there. So they've given it the capacity of 2, so it can only have pulled 2 stateful beans at a time, and it checks every 1 second to see if it needs to clean that up. So if there's more than 2, it's going to start cleaning them up, and then it's going to passivate those beans. And that's what they're kind of doing here. So they're waiting for 2 seconds and then doing whatever they need to do. And that's what happens. For the exam, the pre and post passivate is everything around serialization and what you do with things that you can't serialize. Or if you're doing, there'll be a lot of Cody type questions or best practice type questions around that. Okay. So the last bit for this is asynchronous communication. So this is new from 3.1 spec. And previously, if you had to do anything that was asynchronous type processing, you had to use the message-driven beans, which wasn't awesome. It was difficult to coordinate the different ways and getting everything to work and testing it. So this makes it a lot easier. You can use the asynchronous methods from stateful and stateless beans and singleton beans, so not message-driven beans. One note though is don't go crazy with asynchronous methods because it's kicking those things off on separate threads. Using thread and thread management is quite resource intensive, so you can have 1,000 of those okies going. It's also not going to be great.
They've improved it in 3.2 apparently.
The threading model, or
this is callback hell. This can lead to literally callback hell.
Mm-hmm.
So you want something like promises. It's almost coming on like you .NETers have with promises.
I don't have promises.
Don't you have promises?
No, we've got callbacks, and not callbacks, but the async. We mark something with async and await is what they call it. It's almost like fork and join.
Yeah, that I think that's what they brought in with 3.2. I'll find out, but they really discourage this usage of async because there's a lot of empty patterns that you can literally go, okay, callback and callback and callback and callback, and then you get the incorrect actual timing. Just wait in futures forever. Discourage that.
That's also a reason not to use a lot of them, or not use them at all.
I've never seen it being used anywhere else.
Okay, so around the exam stuff there, so if you are running an asynchronous method as part of a transaction, that's not going to propagate to the asynchronous method, so you'll have to take care of that yourself. Security context does propagate though, so you can't go and call something there if you're not allowed to call it, like any business method. So it's still like a business method. You can apply the asynchronous at like a class level or at a method level. So if you apply at a class level, everything in the class is asynchronous. There are some rules though. For a method to be asynchronous, it needs to return a future or void. It can't return just an int or a string or a different object. It has to return a future or a void.
And all of you should know futures because you passed. I'm still waiting for you, programmers. Yeah.
And the one thing though is if you are going to use void, because it's an asynchronous call, if at method returns a void and there is an exception when that whatever the asynchronous method is doing, if an exception happens, it's not going to be returned to the client. So you're just never going to know if it's happened or not. So that void is a fire and forget, but you have to make provision for the fact that if there's an exception and it's important to you, that you can sort of go and find out why it didn't happen. So if let's say you want to send off an email as part of a process, but to continue with whatever the method is doing, you don't care if that email worked or not. You might have a process that goes on afterwards and sees if there's any failed emails and try and resend them. Stuff like that.
Health. You already stopped.
No, not callbacks. Not doing a callback there. I mean, you go and log it. So you'll say, okay, well, in your async message, I want to send an email. So you go and mark something in the database. I want to send an email. If it's successful, you can mark it as successful. So if there's an exception, it's not going to be there. Or you can just say, well, this new client, have I sent him this email? So you might want to have something, but during the actual process, you don't actually care if it happened or not. So there you could do it like that.
They wrote this in Vodacom. They actually wrote an annotation to plug into an EJB, a custom aspect to, I don't know if Joe can speak on it though, but they actually wrote their own, Rachel wrote their own asynchronous annotation because they were using EJB JE 1.4. Joe, is this the annotation that you guys wrote?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
They did something similar. So at that point in time, there wasn't something like asynchronous, but there was like work managers. But the work managers differs for every container, and it's actually not supposed to use work managers for threat management. So what they basically did was just created their own annotation, which is now nicely encapsulated in each bit 3.1. So that's basically what they did. Something very similar.
Okay.
All right. So with a future, what you'll do is you go and check if it's done to see if it's done. So if you want to do any processing and not sit and just wait for it to eventually get back, you can have a while loop and go and see is it done, do whatever other processing. And then once you're ready to get the results from the future, you can just do whatever your future was called, .get, to get the value back from it. And this is just something around the exam. If you get an EJB exception, it means that the container can't allocate resources. So it's trying to call that async method for whatever reason it can't get to it. Either there isn't enough stateless beans available, or the stateful bean isn't there anymore, or whatever happened. But that'll happen there. And then on your async get method, you get an execution exception. And then in your execution exception, you have to go and see what the actual exception was. The other thing around futures as well is that you can go and cancel them. So if it's a long-running process, you can actually go and call cancel on that. So a async method doesn't have to implement it. But it can. And one of the things that when you're doing asynchronous methods is that to look for is that you should see if it's possible to actually go and cancel that method. If it is for whatever reason, it's long-running and it's going to return a future. So see if it's possible to put a cancel in there. And then last thing is just there, so the client can go and check if it can interrupt it. So that's something you can set on the bean, so the client can see, can I do it? If I can't, then it's not even going to try and cancel it. All right, and then let's get to
Damn.
last demo. I'm going to close this other IntelliJ.
I don't know why you got so many. It runs in like its own EJB container on a Jetty instance. The whole thing just runs in that. Servicing events.
Where are we now? One IntelliJ.
IntelliJ runs a web server in the background. servicing events.
Probably. All right, so we've got a async bean here. Let's see if it will work now. So an async bean here, stateless bean. Using a resource to get our session context there. The reason for that is so we can see if what cancel was called on it. So I've got 3 different methods here. Let's say this one is marked. We've got 3 different methods here, a one that does return a value, a one that returns a future, and a one that can be cancelled. So both of these sort of just wait a bit, so I put them to sleep there. Shh, for 2 seconds. Let's sleep for 2 seconds there. And then the one that you can cancel, it's just in a while loop. It's going to run until the cancel gets called, and it checks every 2 seconds if cancel was hit by that. One thing, like say, if you do return a future, you have to return an async result as a thing. So you can't just go and return a string, although it is, you have to return an async result for that. Then on the other thing I want to show today as well is how to set up a RESTful service using the EJBs.
Different certification.
Different certification, but also where you have to know about RESTful services and web services for this. That it is possible. So first of all, with the first week, you can only do this on a stateless or singleton, so you can't do it for a stateful bean. That's the first thing. It needs to be a specific type of bean. And the other bit is you just need to actually just go and give it a path. So that's part of the WS. And the path for this is going to be /async. So that's to get to this resource for this controller, and then for each method, you have to go and annotate them, and you can either give them if you want to have a different path to the main one, and you can't have more than one, then you can go and give them a path as well. So the first thing you do is you need to see what type of HTTP verb it's going to get. So it's going to be a get for this, and I'm going to give it a different path as well. It's going to be /none. So get this up and running. It's just giving the HTTP verb that you need for it and giving the correct path. So this will be cancel value. They've got 3 different methods on that controller. What I've done is I've created a status bean, given it a path that the container will pick up, and then for each method I've given it an HTTP verb. It can be get, post, put, the verb you want to use. So I've used get for all of these, and then the path to that specific method. So to get that resource. I've got none, value, and cancel on there. So for the none one, it just does the call, nothing comes back, and it just goes on with its life. With the one that gets the future back, let's say we get return value, get a future value back there, and then you have to do the get on that. So like I said, this can throw an execution exception or interrupted exception if it was cancelled. So you need to make provision for that. And then for the cancel one, doing the same thing, we're doing the call, we're getting the future back. We then go and put the controller to sleep for a bit, call the cancel, put to sleep again, and then go on. And we'll see what happens.
So can you do that? You wouldn't be able to do that, obviously, if you weren't running in an EJB container. If you're just running in a servlet container with RESTful services, you wouldn't be able to.
No, you would be able to call a bean from there.
No, like Tomcat.
Oh, yeah, probably not. And that's like I said, so an async bean, when it calls those methods, it's going to print some things out there. So when it's getting cancelled, it's going to say I'm still going, and then I've been cancelled, I'm returning a value, and so on. So Maven package. What it does is when you do have RESTful services in there, it actually shows you the paths in your as part of the deployment. So you can see it's got a get there, and the actual path that it's going to use on there. All right, so if you want to test this, you can use whatever you want to with RESTful services. Either something like, what's the SOAPy one from Smart Bay?
SOAP UI.
SOAP UI, or if you want to go old school.
Definitely not free. Eclipse has a REST.
No, it is free.
SOAP UI.
Yeah.
Oh no, but it's really ugly, the free one.
No, well, the main one only gives you access to databases and JMS. That's all.
No, but it gives you something called a drop-down view, like a menu view. So if you give it a BA, they go, I can't write XML, but with the professional, it actually lets you into.
But what do BAs want to do with SOAP UI anyway?
Don't limit them. They have purpose.
All right, so anyways, I'm going to use a plugin for Chrome called Postman. So if you haven't used it before, it's quite cool. So we've got our path there, it's HTTP async bean, which is the name of the WAR file. Async, which is the path, and then none, which is like the other bit of the path. And we're going to do a get call there. So I'm just going to do a send. And you can see on the thing there, the controller says getting nothing, and the async bean says I'm not returning anything. So that's the straightforward call there. If I then go and hit the one that returns a value, so value call there, do a post on that. You can see the controller says I'm getting a value, async I'm returning a value, and controller got the value. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you've worked with any of the threading stuff or futures before, this just works. So around the exam, it's just understanding the little nuances around it, how you can cancel, when you can cancel, what happens with exceptions, how to define async method. So if in the exam, they might give you some code that says, here's a method, and instead of saying asynchronous, they say at async, and asking you, is that a valid one? Or it's a method that's not returning a future, it's just returning a string or an int, and you have to identify which one is the right one. And then the last one here is just doing the cancel. And when I send that, you can see the controller is calling a cancelling value, still going, async beans have been cancelled, and then that's done. Doesn't return anything. So it's pretty straightforward. There are demos, bits about these in the Tommy stuff, and BGP specification I think has some of it on there as well. I'll put these on Git again anyway as well. Right. So any questions? Anybody on async life cycles? This is sort of one of those things where you just need to learn it. You just need to know it.
Device?
Yes.
Just one question in terms of annotating your session B now as a RESTful service.
Yes.
I don't fully understand what happens underneath. Why would you? Does it actually create a web service as well as an EJB? And when you call the web service, does it automatically launch the EJB? I'm struggling to understand exactly that kind of paradigm. I would have thought that you would have a RESTful service and then inject a bean into it, and then from the RESTful service method call the bean. Can you clarify that for me, please?
All right, so the reason you'd want to do that is if you want to get access to that bean, but from something outside of Java or outside of the container. So let's say from JavaScript or from .NET. So if you want to expose it as like a web service or a REST service, then you'll do that. So it'll still be a bean, and you can still access it as a bean, but it'll also be exposed as a RESTful service or as a web service. So
underlying, because I know Joe's very technical, so he wants to know what container's running. There's a container underneath there called Jersey. It's Jersey or Open Web Beans or something.
Tommy.
Yeah, I think Tommy uses.
It actually says which one.
And there's a container, and so it actually plugs the web service, the RESTful container, into and aligns it with the lifecycle of the EJB. So you actually have another whole container running there that has a whole nother lifecycle. And just the annotations actually aligns the Jersey container with the EJB container.
Yeah. Well, it's running in Tommy, so it'll be Catalina.
So if I understand you correct, it will basically it will have the RESTful service, but when you call the RESTful service under the hood, it will actually look up the bean, instantiate the bean, and call that method on the bean. Yeah. It's like combining the two together. Am I correct?
Yeah. If you want to know more, come to the web service certification we're going to be running later, where we will teach you to the nth degree SOAP and REST.
Yeah, and I fully understand both the technologies. I'm just, it's a bit confusing just that when they mix it like this. I just wasn't sure if it actually create a RESTful service which is separate from the EJB, or does it actually
I think
wrap
so.
it?
It creates the EJB descriptor, and then it also creates in your web.xml. It maps your URL of that, not that EJB, using a Jersey descriptor. So you'd actually get the RESTful service, and you'd get on your web.xml. I don't know how to actually show you guys if you have those annotations, how it forward engineers the XML. With something like WebSphere and WebLogic, then you can actually go see the post compiled web.xml. So play around with that. WebSphere 8.55 is free. I don't know if you're aware of that. There's also a Liberty profile, and it comes with a lot of nice features. You can actually see that.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And then, so the only comment on that would be that it will only be if you would like to expose your full EJB like that to the rest of the world. But I can see the benefit in that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so for this weekend, it's 10 questions again, an hour. Quiz opens on Friday, closes on Sunday. Next week, we're going to be looking at singleton beans, so a bit in more detail. We touched on singleton beans a bit in week 2, so going into the life cycle and what we use singleton beans for and so on. And then there might be a question about singleton beans in the quiz. So you could start reading that ahead of time. All right, so the attendance keyword for today, just need to remember here, I think it's async. Should be async. It doesn't let me know. I'm pretty
or
sure
you didn't attend.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.